A little more than 1 year ago, Chief Harteau and I requested that the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services in the administration of President Barack Obama conduct an independent after-action review of the City of Minneapolis's response to the 18-day occupation of the grounds, vestibule, and street in front of the 4th Precinct Police Station that took place in November and December of 2015. As I said a year ago when we requested the report, we wanted a respected, experienced source outside of the city to tell us what went well and where we could have done better. We asked them to conduct a thorough, independent review inside and outside of City Hall, one that included talking to a wide variety of stakeholders, which I insisted include community members. We did so because we did not want to let this important moment in the life of our city, one rooted in tragedy, pass without our learning everything that there was to learn from it. We did so because we are committed to continuous improvement and to transparency. 1 year later, the after-action review that we asked for is back for all of us to see. The Department of Justice released it this morning. The occupation of the 4th Precinct followed the tragic death of Jamar Clark. And please allow me again to express my condolences, my deepest condolences, to his family for their terrible loss, which continues to be a loss that our entire city feels. The occupation itself was also one of the most searing events in recent memory in Minneapolis. No one in Minneapolis, indeed no one in America, had been through anything like it before, and no city has been through anything like it since, and God willing, no city will have to go through it again. Throughout the occupation, our top goal as a city was to keep all the people of Minneapolis safe. Demonstrators, officers, neighbors, residents, everyone. I woke up every single day of those 18 days asking myself, what needs to happen today to keep all the people of Minneapolis safe? Am I willing to do what is needed, regardless of personal convenience or comfort, to make sure that people in Minneapolis, all the people of Minneapolis, stay safe? And I went to bed every day of those 18 days asking myself, did we keep all the people of Minneapolis safe? And the hardest moments for me were when people, demonstrators and officers both, were in harm's way, or when I feared for the health and safety of neighbors as the occupation wore on. The worst moment for me, and I am certain for everyone, was when demonstrators were shot outside the precinct by white supremacists. I am proud to say that the report says that by and large we came through this experience well, in need of healing for certain, but far better than most other cities, with very few arrests, no serious injuries from police demonstrator interactions that we know of, and no damage to private property, and all in the course of an unprecedented event of unprecedented length that no other city and no other people have been through before or since. We didn't do things perfectly, and we certainly made mistakes, which I will get to in a moment. But by and large, as a people and as a city, we came through this well. And overall, the report notes that city leaders, quote unquote, city leaders and MPD officials worked to maintain the First Amendment right of demonstrators while ensuring their safety, the safety of police officers, and the safety of the community as a whole, unquote, in what it calls, quote, a difficult national environment, unquote. In the end, the report notes that we succeeded at this. The city, quote, brought the occupation to a peaceful conclusion and avoided the civil disturbances that occurred in other cities, unquote. The report notes that we achieved this end through a strategy of negotiated management, which it says is consistent with emerging current best practices and the recommendations of President Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, which we as a city and as a police department have been implementing. And, quoting the report again, the commitment of the city, the police department, and individual officers to a peaceful, measured response played a large role in keeping the occupation from escalating into violent riots. In other words, in one of the hardest, most challenging moments that we have lived through in recent decades, when people were in great pain, we succeeded overall in balancing people's First Amendment right to peaceful protest with the need to keep people safe and our city safe. And this happened for many reasons, one of which the report highlights that, quote, officers throughout the MPD demonstrated extraordinary resilience and professionalism in their response to the occupation, unquote. I agree entirely, and I know Chief Harteau does as well. I saw firsthand the professionalism that officers maintained despite the great personal toll that the occupation took on many of them, and I commend them and I thank them for it. Another reason that Minneapolis got through this well is the patience and restraint that demonstrators and community members also showed. Despite many difficult moments during those 18 days, the vast majority of demonstrators stayed focused on achieving their goals peacefully. As a result, during those 18 days, there were countless unheralded acts of communication and cooperation among and between demonstrators, police officers and leadership, neighbors, elected officials, advocates, community leaders, and others that also played an important role in keeping everyone and our city safe. I extend my personal gratitude. I personally extend my gratitude, and I offer the gratitude of the entire city to every single person who worked hard to respect each other's rights and keep our people and our city safe. So, we asked for this report to find out not only what went well, but what we could have done better. The report offers that as well. It came back with criticism and a number of recommendations for improvement, which we take seriously. Among those are, our response to the occupation was not rigorously structured and was not well coordinated among elected officials and law enforcement. Our strategy ending the occupation peacefully through negotiated management was not well communicated to others, including line officers. Inconsistent and sometimes contradictory public statement from various leaders made it harder to resolve the occupation. Sharing of information internally was inconsistent and sometimes deliberately thwarted. Uses of non-lethal force should have been individually tracked and documented. Officers were well trained in some crowd management tactics, but were not adequately trained in others, and crowd management policies need to be revisited and updated. These are some of the findings and recommendations. And as a result of these findings and recommendations, we now have much more clarity about how to plan for and better coordinate the management of an uncertain and protracted situation like this, the kind of training and support our officers need to manage and be resilient through a situation like this, the kinds of policies and procedures that need to be in place then followed, and how better to communicate both internally and externally about our goals and the strategies we are pursuing to reach them. And the report also reinforces the fact that we need leaders in our precincts who will faithfully execute direct orders and who will deliver the same clear and consistent message to officers, community members, and city leaders. And unfortunately, this was not the case with key precinct leadership during the occupation, and when we learned of it later, we took steps to correct the issues. So, while this report makes many recommendations, which we consider very closely and will consider very closely, it falls short on making a couple of others. For example, when it comes to police-community relationships, I'm pleased that the report essentially recommends that we should continue good work that we have already been doing. I'm pleased about that, but I also know that we can do more. Similarly, while the report rightly addresses the need to support officer wellness and resilience, it is silent on community wellness and resilience, which we had already taken initiative to address. That's not acceptable to me. So for these reasons, I'll be reaching out to community members myself to listen to what they think of this report. We'll be doing that regardless, and to ask what else we can do as a community. For me personally, the report's findings about communications that were unclear, inconsistent, or incomplete are ones that I take to heart. In the months after the occupation ended, I sat down to talk with dozens of people about it, one-on-one, some who agreed with decisions I had made, many who did not. And what I heard consistently was that my communication during the occupation came up short. It became clear to me that people did not understand at the time, and that many have not understood since, that my goal was to keep our city and all our people safe, that I wanted to make sure that demonstrators' constitutional right to express their grief, to express their demands, to express their anger safely was honored and protected, and that I was pursuing a strategy of negotiated management to end the occupation peacefully in a way that could keep the conversation going. And that misunderstanding is on me. That is not on anybody else. I am aware that at that moment, the people of Minneapolis, all of us, needed to hear from me more clearly, more frequently, and more consistently. My communication fell short. Regardless of whether it's because I lacked the bandwidth, or I was constrained by legal reasons, or I simply lacked the skill, I did not communicate in a way that would have helped the situation go better. I'm sorry. I am sorry. I know from making amends in my personal life that it's not enough to merely say that I am sorry. I also get to make living amends. For me, I have already taken steps to improve my communication with the community and with media. I have reorganized resources in my office and with my staff to make a difference in communications with individuals, with groups, and the media, and I am doing my best to be more rigorous in my outreach and in my information sharing. It is a wheel to which I am consciously putting my shoulder every day, and I will continue to work to improve. The occupation of the 4th Precinct was, as I said, a searing moment for our city. It was also a catalytic moment. It was a moment that we at the city used to move further, faster, and in some cases differently toward 21st century policing and transforming police-community relations. And this work includes, but is not limited to, accelerating procedural justice and implicit bias training for all MPD officers in the immediate aftermath of the occupation, completing crisis intervention training for all officers by the end of 2016, making it easier to track and file complaints of police misconduct, winning a 5-year, $5 million federal grant to address trauma and build resiliency and equity in communities that have experienced civil unrest related to law enforcement, investing significantly more resources into community policing, a recommendation of this report, accelerating the work of the National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice to begin monthly empathy and healing sessions between the community and Chief Harteau, work that no other city is doing. Enhancing MPD policy around de-escalation, sanctity of life, duty to report, and duty to intervene. Completing the rollout of body-worn cameras on all police officers that respond to 911 calls. Apologizing to the signatories of the 2003 mediation agreement between the community and the MPD for work not done, and negotiating a contract between the city and the Police Officers Federation that is a big step forward in creating a citywide culture of accountability. And the work that I've been doing to move this agenda forward has not been limited to Minneapolis. Tomorrow, I will be in Washington, D.C. to help release a resource guide tailored specifically to mayors to handling police-involved shootings and in-custody deaths. This guide was created on a recommendation that I made shortly after the 4th Precinct occupation to Cities United, a national movement of nearly 90 partner cities to reduce violence that affects African American men and boys and lift them up as assets to our communities. I made the recommendation because I knew I was not the first mayor to wish that she had a guide of best practices to follow in an officer-involved shooting, and unfortunately, I am likely not to be the last. So I'm happy to see that this guide, which will be released tomorrow, offers a clear and concise set of actions that mayors can take not only after a critical incident, but before one happens as well, to help community, officers, and residents alike be heard, informed, consulted, respected, and to help our cities remain united. It is another contribution that Minneapolis is making to the national conversation around policing and police-community relationships in the 21st century. So look, Chief Harteau and I asked for this report. We asked the Department of Justice of the Obama administration to take an experienced, thorough, independent look at what we did and did not do in response to the occupation. We asked that they talk to as many stakeholders as they could, especially at my insistence in community. And we asked that they come back and share with our entire city their unvarnished findings and recommendations for all of us to inspect. And this they have done today, and I thank them for it. We take this report seriously, both in its praise and in its criticism. The conclusions we can draw from it hew to what we already know. If we are to build trust between the MPD and our communities, we have to address our challenges head on. The chief and I have demonstrated our willingness and ability to do that, and our willingness to look ourselves squarely in the eye and ask, what can we do better? And then listen and change when the answers come. We are joined by a strong, active community committed to coming together for the common good, and by police and city leadership willing to do the difficult work of actual systems change, which takes time, it takes energy, it takes commitment. We have all of that, and we are using it. So I look forward to consulting with all stakeholders, including police officers and community members, about how best to take advantage of all that there is to learn from this report and how to do better as a result. This marks a new phase of our shared community project. Thank you. Chief Harteau.
Thank you, Mayor. So the mayor spoke a lot about, the reasons why we asked for this, and I just wanted to add a couple. We're frankly not afraid to have others look inside. We're not afraid to ask the questions, what can we do better? We want to be better. And what did we do well? And this has to be somewhat of a blueprint for other cities and agencies across the country. I've already gone to the Major City Chiefs Association and spoke to most of the major city chiefs across this country about what happened and lessons learned. We're still going through the findings and recommendations, but I want to first and foremost, just as I was then, today, say how proud I am of our officers and their professional and restrained response. I was at the precinct multiple times a day on most days during the occupation. What the officers endured with verbal attacks and other situations would challenge any one of us, even on our best days. What I was most disturbed by is the treatment our officer of color received. The folks out at the occupation were beyond words how the officers of color were treated. And it was increasingly worse than other officers. So far, there is nothing in this report that is a total surprise. We did, prior to the report, we had done many debriefings and started to look at things we could change on and improve, and we've made some of those already. Lessons learned. Communication, communication, communication. I'm open to suggestions in communication from any one of you. No matter what the incident, the scenario, the relationship, it all boils down to communication. Always a challenge. Internally within the agency, it was rapidly changing, minute by minute, day by day. Clearly, we need more effective communication with officers at all ranks and all assignments. So it isn't just specific to those officers that were assigned to the precinct, but officers and civilian members of this department that were heavily impacted, and their family members who oftentimes only got their news through the news. We had leadership challenges. We need more effective communication with our leadership. I need to find a better process and have a more effective check and balance to ensure that the messages that I'm giving move through the rank and file. It wasn't necessarily so much the what we were doing, but the why we were doing it. And everybody likes to hear the why. And then there was another component of, I don't agree with the why, so therefore this is what I hear. That is a challenge. We need to improve communication internally with our city enterprise. This wasn't just a siloed police response. This was entirely the city and our community and our city leadership. So we need to look at assigning people specifically to communicating with those various groups. We need to improve communication within our community. We have done a really good job of advancing our social media communication. Twitter was a great tool for us to get out messages really quickly, to stop some of the false narratives that were going on. But what about all those people that don't have access to social media, that don't look at Facebook, that maybe don't watch the news, right? So we have to continue to look at ways to communicate with them. Then there's training and policy improvements that we need to make. First, I want to talk about use of force. We hold our officers to the highest standards, and all uses of force are investigated. All reported force was reviewed and determined to be consistent with MPD training and policy. There is one open lawsuit in which the plaintiff has alleged excessive force. However, this initial review is determined within policy, but it is, like I said, we have an open case. We had a protocol for deploying marking rounds. That's the less lethal, where we're able to mark individuals that are committing crime. But we've learned we did not have an effective strategy, or one that was communicated effectively, in how we secure individuals that are marked once they've been marked in the crowds and after it's been deployed. What we've gained already are new relationships. We have increased our relationships with those that in the community that we have existing relationships with, and we've developed new partnerships. We now have a police community support team that's made up of members of our community and those in the Minneapolis Police Department. When we have a critical incident, they respond to those scenes to help share information, to provide people with resources, and to help dispel false narratives across the board. The mayor talked about a plethora of things that we've done, including procedural justice, so I won't go into those. We responded immediately, almost immediately, to community concerns about our SWAT team members wearing camouflage. They now wear navy blue. Camouflage was an issue for those. We find it invaluable, frankly, to use our bicycle rapid response team in a lot of events that we have, including demonstrations. The mayor mentioned resiliency. It's important, and I purposely didn't wear my uniform today, and I've done this at many other occasions, to remind people that underneath the uniforms are human beings. And we make mistakes, but we're also impacted by things that we see. We have an aging department, and we have many officers that have been assigned for an extensive period of time. And just like our community is exposed to trauma and violence, and that has an impact on you, so too does that violence exposure and trauma to police officers. So we're working with clinical psychologists to ensure that we're making sure we have healthy cops, and that we're addressing that burnout and things that go on in them as time goes by. If we don't have healthy cops, it's just like when we hire. We have to have a good department, so we have to hire the right people on the front end. We have to ensure we have a culture of accountability and processes in place to have good officers. But we also need to deal with their human impact. And that's our resiliency campaign. I got off on a tangent, so I lost myself. What was validated? The report uses many terms to describe our officers. Quote, displayed commendable restraint and resiliency in extremely difficult circumstances. Quote, the city and its police department brought the occupation to a peaceful conclusion and avoided civil disturbances that occurred in other cities. That was at the forefront of the mind of the mayor and I. Always ensuring we had that balance, and public safety was a number one priority for everyone, police and community. What we dealt with was unprecedented. We know there was no playbook. The assessment is the new playbook. Constantly changing environment and circumstances. We were not only dealing with the local environment, but the national environment and things that occurred at the time. We had people coming from all parts of this country to participate, frankly, in a movement that they weren't really sure. Some of them weren't really sure why they were here. Others were very clear why they were here. But we didn't have pre-established relationships with them. Could we have done things differently? Yeah, hindsight is 20/20. Always looking at how we can do things differently. But keeping in mind, number one, we did the good job of balancing the public safety impact on surrounding neighborhoods, balancing First Amendment rights, and officer safety. But I continue to look at things that I could do differently in communication, in helping to foster the leadership, and policies. Policies are very fluid, and they should be, because you can't write a policy that can address every situation. There are no two situations that are exactly the same. So they have to be fluid, and we have to constantly be reevaluating them. And that's exactly what we're doing with many of the things that involve the occupation.